If the end of Canto 6 of Book 3 of The Fairy Queen slowed everything down and brought us to a kind of contemplative place where we were looking around the Garden of Adonis, hanging out, wondering at the kind of strange, miraculous place the poem had brought us, Canto 7 picks up the pace to lightning, frenetic speed, throwing a whole bunch of new characters at us by the time it's over. We start off with Florimel. You remember Florimel, our gorgeous, fearful virgin who's so frightened she can't tell friend from foe that she runs away from the good guys too, running away from Arthur, who's like the best of the good guys. And okay, and we start with her. What we're not going to see Arthur's squire Timaeus, or Britomart. All these characters will be back later in The Fairy Queen. Britomart will be back in Book 3 because it's her book. Arthur has to come back. Arthur comes back in every book of The Fairy Queen because he is hero number 12. Even though there are only 6 books, because that's how long Spencer lived. We know that Arthur is the planned Book 12 hero. He's the baddest of the bad and the best of the best. He's the one we're all pointing to, and he generally shows up to bail other people out. Okay, Florimel happens across a witch. Could happen, at least in this, and you know, in this poem that's very dedicated to the idea that virtuous people look good, that good character is replicated in physical beauty, which is not at all the way it happens in the real world. There are some good people who are good looking, and there are some other people who are good looking, and there are some good people who, you know, maybe not to my taste. Beauty's in the beholder, but maybe there are people of good character whose beauty tends not to be in the eye of many beholders. Physical beauty and character in the real world, we can all see, if we're not dense, we can all kind of see that those don't correlate. In The Fairy Queen, the best people are also gorgeous all the time, and Spencer doesn't really differentiate them. They're all just gorgeously pretty in not very specific ways. Sometimes it's like a TV show on the CW network, all the kind of good-looking people that are hard to tell apart. Okay, this idea, good people look good, bad people look bad, seems to be borne out, at least initially, when Florimel happens upon the witch, who's a horrible-looking old hag, whose evil character is evident, and that's why she's age. Age has nothing to do with this. Time has nothing to do with this. No. Why does she look like this? Why does she look like a hag? Because she's a bad person. It's fairy tale logic. It's romance logic. It's not real-world logic, but this, you might have noticed, is not a poem about realism. And let me tell you, when that witch sees Florimel, she is super impressed. So, I want to turn to page 131 if you have our book, and stanza 9. And this, the first line of this stanza uses the old-fashioned plural for eyes, ein. Yeah, that's right, mine ein. Shakespeare uses it too in A Midsummer Night's Dream and in other places. With that adown out of her crystal eyne, few trickling tears she softly forth let fall, that like to orient pearls did purely shine upon her snowy cheek, and therewithal she sighed soft, that none so bestial, nor savage heart, but ruth of her sad plight would make to melt, or piteously appall. And that vile hag, were her whole delight and mischief, was much moved at so piteous sight. Here in stanza 9, even though the hag is an evil person who delights only in mischief, only in doing bad things, she's terrible. But Florimel is so pretty, and it's so sad. She feels bad for her. Florimel is sometimes I imagine Florimel sometimes as a kind of earlier generation of Disney princesses, the ones who aren't tough or assertive, old school World War II era ones. Let's look at how we imagine Florimel. Her eyes are like crystal. It's about clarity and whiteness. It's about lack of color. She's a blonde. She's got snow white skin. This is Snow White, except blonde. Super pale. Like a ghost, man. Her eyes are like crystal eyed. Few trickling tears. She softly forth-let falling. They fall softly. She's that like two orient pearls did purely shine. It's interesting that they're pearls from the east. That's interesting. But they're pearl-like tears. They're clear and they're white. Upon her snowy cheek, put a pin in the snowy cheek. Cheek is white as snow. Tears like pearls. Eyes like crystal. This is a seriously pale person. And therewithal she sighed soft, so softly that no one submits. No one is so animal-like, so beastly. No, savage-hearted, but Ruth of her sad heart would make it would melt anybody, even the most savage beast. Later, we will find this is another moment when Spencer is setting up something that's going to happen later in the canto, sometimes in the next canto. Here, in this canto, we're going to meet one of Florimel's unrequited lovers, one of the knights who's out trying to find her and rescue her for love of her, who is Sir Satyron, who's a kind of wild man knight, who is the knight of wilderness, a pretty good guy. Not a hero of a book, not ever an exemplar of a particular Christian virtue, but one of the good guys by and large. And that vile hag was moved to so much piteous sight. I want to skip stanza to stanza 11. Then this is the witch. Though 'gan she gather up her garments rent, and her loose locks to dight in order due, with golden wreath and gorgeous ornament, whom such one as the wicked hag did view, she was astonished at her heavenly hue, and doubted her to deem an earthly wight, but or some goddess, or of Diana's crew, and thought her to adore with humble sprite. To adore things so divine as beauty were but right. And there's the ideological point right there. The witch is so amazed at how beautiful Florimel is. She first of all thinks this must be someone supernatural. This is not a human being. This must be either a goddess or one of Diana's nymphs who kind of run with her in the hunting train, Diana's entourage. Okay, that's strange. And thinks to adore her. Now, on the one hand, this is the sin of idolatry. You're not supposed to be worshiping people who are not gods or pagan gods. So that adoration for Spencer is like, you're supposed to see that as suspect. But you are, because this is still a Neoplatonic ideology too, where the beautiful leads us up to the good and other things like it. To adore things so divine as beauty, we're about right. Certainly, you're supposed to worship beauty because beauty is divine. Beauty is godlike. Well, you want to see love at first sight? Wicked Witch has a son who is lazy, no good churl. Sure, he's a lazy, no good churl. But man, can you blame him? We've just heard about how babylicious Florimel is. She's apparently irresistible. And actually, I'll say this. The son isn't wrong. Florimel is an appropriate love object. She looks good and is good. Her beauty is not deceptive. All the boys are crazy for Florimel, and in the poem's logic, they're not wrong because Florimel is a good and virtuous person. Though she is immature in that her fearfulness is a major flaw for her. This is what happens in stanza 13. The son comes up. He coming home at undertime there found the fairest creature that he ever saw sitting beside his mother on the ground. The sight whereof did greatly him adaw, and his base thought with terror and with awe so inly smote as one that had gazed on the bright sun unwares, doth soon withdraw his feeble eyne. With too much brightness dazed, so stared he on her, and stood long while amazed. He looks on her like someone who's looked at the sun without expecting it. The most beautiful woman he's ever seen, the most creature he's ever seen. And even his base, his low and dirty thought, is struck with terror and with awe. Something positive is happening. He should be terrified and awed by the divine. He should respect this. On one level, he is coded as a bad guy. He behaves like a bad guy. But right here, he responds to love the way he's supposed to. He sees a beautiful, virtuous woman, and he sees her and is stunned by her beauty, and that connects to her virtue. She is imagined as crystalline and sun-like and snowy. The idea is that her virtue shines through her. There are a lot of kind of metaphors of transparency around Florimel. Now, is this also the ideology of whiteness in a northerly country? You betcha. But so it is. She is like the sun shining through. He is stunned. He is amazed, which means lost, bewildered. He's hooked. Now we're meeting lots of new characters. It's easy to lose track of them. The way you keep track of them is the new characters, and there are a bunch, are mirrors or reflections of the characters we've already met. We keep meeting different lovers who are falling in love, struck at first sight. There's Timaeus seeing both Phoebe, and he's a goner. Now we have the witch's son who is seeing Florimel, and he's a goner. Same effect, and they're both right. They're seeing beautiful, virtuous woman. They're falling in love, and the witch's son isn't so wrong. He's a bad guy, but he behaves like everybody else does. Stanzas 15 and 16. But the fair virgin was so meek and mild that she to them vouchsafed to embase her goodly port, and to their senses viled her gentle speech applied, and that in short space she grew familiar in that desert place. During which time the churl, through her so kind and courteous use, conceived affection base, and cast to love her in his brutish mind. No love, but brutish lust, that was so beastly tined. Okay, love is supposed to ennoble you, but here it brings him down. He just wants the sex. Maybe. We know that because Spencer tells us that, but uncomfortably, this lustful base lover behaves pretty much like the ennobled good lovers do. Again, love is supposed to move your mind up to higher, nobler things. It doesn't work for the hag son because he's the hag son because his character is bad, and apparently the beauty of a good woman is totally wasted on him. And that's one version of the story. That seems to be what the poem's telling us, but also the poem shows us being just like the others. Here it comes. Closely the wicked flame his bowels brent, and shortly grew into outrageous fire. Yet had he not the heart, nor hardiment as unto her to utter his desire. His caitiff thought durst not so high aspire, but with soft sighs and lovely semblances he weened that his infection entire she should read. Many resemblances to her he made, and many kind remembrances. He is doing the Timaeus thing. He is in love the way Arthur is, the way Britomart is, the way Timaeus is. And like Timaeus, he feels that he's below his lover, and like Timaeus, he's right. But here, this is the bad version of that. There are continued shadows, reflections, foils of existing characters. Instead of having one character develop and become a more complicated, realistic character, because we're not doing realism, we meet another character who reflects another version of that. Oft from the forest wildlings he did bring, whose sides empurpled were with smiling red. Then oft young birds, which he had taught to sing, his mistress praises sweetly caroled. Girlands of flowers, sometimes for her fair head, he fine would dight. Sometimes the squirrel wild, he brought her in bands, so conquered to be her thrall, his fellow servant vile. All which she of him took, with countenance meek and mild. It doesn't seem like a bad guy. He's going out, he's hunting for her, and there's that empurpling in red, which is just like the cutting of the wounding and the empurpling of the lover struck with Cupid's arrow we've seen before. He's teaching birds to sing. He's making garlands of flowers for her. He's capturing wild birds and teaching them to sing to her. He tames a squirrel. Here's a squirrel to be your pet. And me and the squirrel were your two wild, lowly, bestial pets. He doesn't seem that bad. Florimel cuts out. She wants no part of this. She finds her chance. She sneaks out. And what does this lover do when the love object goes away? Stanza 20. But that lewd lover did the most lament for her depart that ever man did hear. He knocked his breast with desperate intent, and scratched his face, and with his teeth did tear his rugged flesh, and rent his ragged hair, that his sad mother, seeing his sore plight, was greatly woebegone, and gan to fear lest his frail senses were imperished quite, and love to frenzy turned, since love is frantic height. He suffers, like all lovers suffer. He's not different from the good guys. And the witch looks around for something to help him the same way Britomart nurse looked around for a way to help her back in Canto 2. He's not that different. Okay, whole bunch of things happen. She's flying away. What do? Well, the witch decides to, like, her first play, they'll still make another move in the next canto. Canto 7, her first move is, I'm going to create a monster. I'm going to unleash a monster. It's like a kind of, mostly like a hyena, but not quite a hyena. It's some strange hyena beast that she's going to send to eat Flormo. Flormo runs away. Flormo jumps into a fisherman's boat. That's the last we see her for now. She will be back. We leave her with a fisherman in a boat, random fisherman. Don't know about that guy, but she's off at sea where the beast can't go, so the beast naturally starts eating her horse. Sir Saturn shows up. Sir Saturn, whose father is a satyr, a kind of half-man, half-goat from classical mythology, symbolic of lust. And Saturn has this wild, he has like the unpolished armor, it's like rough out of the forge, and he grew up in the wild with the wild beasts. Speaking of wild beasts, here's Sir Saturn, who kind of embodies wildness and uncourtliness. He ain't never been to any fancy parties, let me tell you that. And who's wearing a symbol, a satyr's head, which is a very strange thing. So one of our relatively good supporting characters in our Book of Chastity is half satyr, and satyrs are famous for uncontrollable lustful sexual desire, and he's wearing a satyr's head on his armor. Yeah, that's strange. Okay, he sees Flormo's horse being eaten. He thinks Flormo's been eaten. He wails on the hyena, or hyena-esque monster. He also sees Flormo, plot point, has dropped her golden girdle. They lost her belt in the rush. The girdle will come back as a plot point in other cantos. Fine, he has a huge. Let's get a good epic simile going. Here's a simile that lasts a whole Spenser stanza. Stanza 34. If you have our book, page 1, bottom 139. As he that strives to stop a sudden flood, and in strong banks his violence enclose, forceth it swell above his wonted mood, and largely overflow the fruitful plain, that all the country seems to be a main, and the rich furrows float, all quite fraudulent. The woeful huntsman doth loud complain to see his whole year's labor lost so soon, for which to God he made an idle boom, so him he held. Okay, this is a long a 9-line comparison about trying to control a river or a flood in strong banks, but actually it makes it flood higher and then destroy the farmland, which gets flooded out, destroys the crops, and the farm is growing. We've got a long way in this image. Get used to it. The epic simile takes a long detour around. Also, here, Spenser's pronoun trouble. Who's holding who here? Who's the monster? Who's the flood? And who's the bank? And what's happening? And do you want to make it flood? Well, Saturn seems to be grabbing the monster pretty good, but it gets chaotic. It's hard to know who's exactly doing what, and I think that is actually how this piece of writing works. You lose track of who is where in the struggle because it's so furious. How do you create suspense? Unclear pronoun references in this case. Don't do that in your own writing. It's a very special use of that technique. Great. So he's got the beast. He ties up the beast puts the beast on a leash with using Flormo's girdle. Okay, a lot is happening. Then a giantess comes by with the beautiful Squire of Dames thrown over the front of her horse. A giantess who is a symbol of lust. We've had heroic Britomart. Now we're going to have Argante, the lustful giantess, is coming by. She throws her captive off to go for Saturn, They fight. Saturn gets stunned. Saturn gets thrown over the horse. But the knight who's been chasing Argante, the vicious giantess, drives him off, and the giantess drops Saturn in order to speed up her flight, right? So her retreat. Okay, a whole lot happened right there. Suddenly we met Saturn, we met Argante, the evil, lustful giantess, who is the twin of the giantess, of the giant Oliphant, and they are symbols of uncontrollable, lustful desire. And then we meet the Squire of Dames, and the Squire of Dames explains to us that who's that knight chasing the evil giantess? That was a female knight. Oh, a female knight in male disguise. Right, I know her. No, it's another one. It's Paladine, whom we will not see again, who is clearly supposed to be the heroine of books 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11. Arthur's the 12th, but we only have 6. Somewhere in the second half of the Fairy Queen, Paladine, I think, was supposed to step up. Another female knight. What's happening? And then we meet the Squire of Dames and hear his story. Okay, what's happening here is mirroring. Britomart is a female warlike embodiment of chastity and proper love and erotic self-control and virtue. Then we meet Argante, who's this giantess who's basically a misogynist nightmare, a fear of a woman's sexual appetite, this lustful giantess who's just grabbing guys like toys, throwing on her horse. I might have this one later. Used for my lust. Oh no, I'm going to use my giantess for lust. Oh no. And is beating up people with her mace. And then she is being chased fearfully by another female knight who's again who represents good order, virtue, etc. Okay. We get a long digression about the life story of Oliphant and Argante, this brother and sister, lustful giant twins, who have committed every inappropriate sex ever, who apparently commit incest together in the womb. I didn't say that. Spencer did. It's a little messed up. Who are models of totally unrestrained sexual appetite, bestiality, incest, doesn't matter, everything, forbidden stuff. Thank God this isn't going to do. But the sense is they are rapacious and know no proper bounds. And then we meet the Squire of Dames. Who is the Squire of Dames? He is a good-looking young person. Stanza 46. To whom approaching, well he might perceive in that foul plight a comely personage, and lovely face, made fit for to deceive frail ladies' hearts with love's consuming rage. Now in the blossom of his freshest age, he reared him up and loosed his iron bands, and after again inquire his parentage, and how he fell into the giant's hands, and who that was, which chased her along the lands. Saturn needs to be caught up in the plot, which is helpful, because we need that. Thank you, Saturn, for asking these questions I wanted to know. The young man has a lovely face, made fit for to deceive frail ladies' hearts. Everybody good-looking isn't a good person. The Squire of Dames is a dangerous, pretty boy. He's not one of them real monsters. He's not one of the heavy villains, but he's not a good guy either. And he doesn't give us his real name. The Squire of Dames is like, I serve the ladies. And we hear his story. He has been sent out by his lady to go for a year, to find as many ladies to do service to, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, as possible. And he gets like 300 testimonials from ladies who want to accept his service. He's done exactly what he's been asked. Shockingly, his beloved is not happy that he's managed to win over 300 other ladies, and tasks him to go out and find 300 more ladies to refuse him. He's been out there for 3 years. He's found 3. Remember, as with the stereotype about the wife of Bath, Spencer is working with a misogynist stereotype about women being more sexual than men and less in control of their sexuality. Argante is the kind of personification of that masculine fear of women's sexual appetite. Before I go, one last moment. I want to give you a moment of Florimel running Florimel runs like somebody, well, out of Ovid. She runs from the monster like she runs from the monster like somebody from classic mythology, or a couple people. But this choice of description is unsettled. There's a long catalog of people she could be compared to. Spencer picks two people who don't seem to go together, and neither of them go with Florimel particularly well. Stanza 26, page 137. Not half so fast the wicked Mira fled from dread of her revenging father's hand, nor half so fast to save her maidenhead fled fearful Daphne on the Aegean strand, as Florimel fled from that monster yond, to reach the sea ere she of him were wrought. For in the sea to drown herself she fawned, rather than give to the tyrant of the tyrant to be caught. Thereto fear gave her wings, and need taught her courage. Okay. Mira, who has been mentioned before, who got mentioned in Canto 2 by the nurse, is a character in Ovid who conceives an incestuous love for her father and tricks him into having sex with her by sneaking up on him in the middle of the night in darkness before electrical light. Come on. Here she's imagined, Florimel is compared to Mira running away from the angry father who, having discovered the incest, wants to kill the father. Oh, so very toxic. All of that. She is also compared to Daphne running away from Apollo. Apollo, god of light, music, art. The god you think would do best with the ladies in lots of ways has terrible love with women. Does all right with boys. But he is chasing the nymph Daphne, who doesn't want to sleep with him. He being an Olympian god, doesn't take no for an answer. They're extremely well behaved. I'm glad nobody worships him anymore. And he's chasing her, and she's fleeing, trying to save her virginity from this god who wants to have sex with her against her will, and she prays to her minor godfather to save her, and he turns her into a tree. Classic reference. Everybody who went to Elizabethan grammar school knew this reference. So that one I can say Florimel's like Daphne. That was a bad story. She gets turned into a vegetable. It's tough. And then Apollo's like, this tree will not be sacred to me. This is my sacred tree now. Really can't take no for an answer. But she's also imagined as running like fearful Mira, someone who's she is compared both to someone who is running to preserve her chastity and running for fear caused by her own terrible sexual guilt. It's a contradiction. It makes no sense, or rather, it only makes sense as a paradox, as a contradiction in tension, which should be familiar, because that's a lot of how the Fairy Queen works.